You have stumbled upon an unusual signal, a transmission so different that it might have you questioning everything you think you know about the world around you. These signals are waves of energy floating through the deep void. They bring us the dark tales of folklore, the stories that fade into the night and creep back up to us in our dreams. This is Vast Unknown Radio, where what you're listening to may not be what you're hearing. Our transmitter is powered up and the antenna is tuned and aligned. That old amplifier, it's still humming. Beyond, or perhaps above, the physical actualization of ourselves, it has been often suggested that at the core of our being, we are made of pure light. This concept has not been constrained to humanity, as it has been applied to other beings, both terrestrial and ultra-terrestrial. And what if this hypothesis is true? We have all heard tales of the Brown Mountain Lights of North Carolina. Others have told us tales of the Marfa Lights in West Texas. And long ago we explained away the Ozark Spook Lights of Joplin, Missouri. These unobtrusive, passive manifestations occur seemingly just out of our reach, with little to no interaction with our physical world. However, we have uncovered a few stories that suggest that the passive nature of these lights is not always the case. Tonight we'll examine two reports that are slightly less benign and perhaps bordering on terrifying. But before we get started, I'd like to remind my listeners that while I attempt to keep these transmissions as family and societally friendly as possible, sometimes the topics of esoterica play to the baser instincts of humanity. Additionally, some of tonight's tales include somewhat graphic depictions of animal mutilation. If that's something you're averse to, please readjust your antenna and perhaps tune into our next broadcast instead. The first of our tales comes to us by way of a seasoned first responder and trained observer. The gentleman, whose identity will be protected, was serving as a police officer in a rural municipality back in the summer of 2005. This officer was patrolling a section of the small city that was bordered on the north by an abandoned canal. As the nearby river overflowed, the canal swelled and was known by the locals as an area of prime catfishing. Running along the canal was a steep embankment which rolled over into a street that ran parallel to its southern bank. Both the street and the canal ran in a near perfect straight line, to eventually dead end into a larger river and essentially served as the northern border of this quiet community. Directly on the other side of the street from the canal was an old cemetery. This cemetery was the equivalent of several city blocks long, and approximately 2 city blocks in distance wide to the street that bordered it on its southern edge. Our officer patrolled this area routinely, and he was familiar not only with the physical layout of the environment, but also of the residents who were mostly fast asleep during the wee hours of the night. The officer drove along the canal road with the window down, listening to the midsummer sounds of the frogs along the bank. It was mentioned that the road in question was unusually wide for this area of the city. All of the other streets were near single lane, with cars parked on both sides. But the canal road was almost 3 lanes wide with no parking permitted on either side. Therefore, any traffic on the wide, arrow-like street was easily observable from a long distance. Our officer first drove west to east down the canal road and then looped through a side street and back east to west. Neither pass down the street provided any unusual observance or anything to raise any type of suspicion. After his second pass, our officer drove through the north entrance to the cemetery and weaved his way to the street that bordered the cemetery on the southern side. There he parked his police cruiser and paused to listen to the radio. He said that he became somewhat preoccupied with scrolling through the call log on his mobile computer terminal and reading the summaries of incidents from earlier in the evening. That is when he noticed what he referred to as the, quote, strangest light that he'd ever seen on the north side of the cemetery. He estimated that it was located directly in the center of the canal road. He stopped his story cold and was insistent on the following details. He said that the old cemetery was wide but nearly completely flat, and even with its large monuments and sporadically placed mausoleums, he could easily see, unobscured across its depth, to the canal road. He then fixated on the details regarding the light. He said, quote, "It was not bright in the sense that one would expect. It's not like it was an LED or a light bulb or anything that had a definite center source. It was as bright on its edges as it was in its center. It was just there, not shining in the traditional sense, but more like just glowing. It was not pulsating or moving whatsoever. The color was not quite white, but it was not yellow or blue either. It was just light. And it was the strangest thing that I had ever seen. And then suddenly, it was not there. It didn't fade or blink or wane like most lights do when they go out. It was just there 1 second and then gone. Total blackness. Nothing. Considering his distance across the cemetery and the position of the light on the road, our officer estimated the light at being approximately 20 feet in diameter. He reiterated that it was not flat across the bottom or reflecting off the road. Quote, "It was a complete circle. I could see all the edges. None of it was blurred." When the light went out, our officer looped around the cemetery on the southern side. He drove along its western border and then back to the canal road. He admitted that this route was somewhat longer than going back through the cemetery, but that he could drive faster and safer on the public road. He said that he never lost sight of the spot where he had seen the light. As our officer drove back onto the canal road, he saw an unexpected and peculiar object directly in the center of the 3-lane wide street. There, in the center of the road he had previously twice traveled, was a simple, blue, camping-style beverage cooler with a white lid. The object was in the exact same spot where he had observed the light. He said the cooler was average size, what he described as 3 foot by 2 foot, large enough to hold a case and a half. As he approached in his vehicle, he said that he could already smell a stench coming from the direction of the cooler, a smell so bad he wanted to stop in his tracks. He proceeded on and exited the cruiser, the cooler brilliantly illuminated in his headlights. As our officer approached the cooler, a second officer arrived. He said that he was alerted when he saw that the original officer was driving quickly along the west end of the cemetery. The other officer, oblivious to the light or anything odd about the cooler, simply walked over and opened the chest. our officer advised that the smell would have caused younger officers to retch. He said, quote, "It hit you so hard your head turned." The chest was filled with a murky gray water with a layer of foam floating on the surface. Breaking the surface of the water was the decaying corpse of a canine. Our officer then said that he and the other officer contacted their sergeant, who in turn responded to their location. The determination was made that, with the department's limited resources, little could be done that was worth investigating in this matter. Our officer, along with a second officer, took the cooler to the canal bank and dumped the remains in a hole at the base of a group of trees. He said that the cooler itself was placed inside a very thick 55-gallon plastic bag and discarded in a dumpster at the rear of the police department. Our officer, now long retired, said that the cooler incident remained a story of curiosity for a long time, and that he never shared the part about seeing the light with any of his coworkers. In his words, "They all believed somebody dropped off a dead dog in a cooler in the middle of the street. I know it's dumb, but even I figure their version is more believable than what I saw." The second of our tales comes by way of yet another first responder, whose identity will again remain protected. This time it's a paramedic who is familiar with the unusual nature of emergency response in urban areas. It's important to understand that this particular urban area is tightly packed with all the commercial and industrial trappings of a bustling mini metropolis. All the buildings are closely packed together, interrupted only by brief concrete patches serving as parking lots. The streets are lined with sidewalks, signage, and at the time of our technological development, the occasional phone booth. Green space is unheard of, and there is no park or wooded lot within miles of the location in question. You'll want to keep this in mind as we reach the conclusion of this story. It is late in the overnight hours when our paramedic arrives on the scene of a car accident. His involvement in the incident begins with the calming of the hysteric driver who's attempting to get his vehicle dislodged from a parking block. The paramedic stated that the low-profile vehicle had veered off the street. It had entered a small parking lot where it struck a parking block and became what he referred to as high-centered. This apparently is the positioning of a vehicle where the drive wheels are lifted just slightly off the ground by some type of obstacle. It's just enough to prevent the vehicle from moving. The paramedic inquired as to the extent of the driver's injury, but he denied any injuries or need for any medical attention. He was, however, in an elevated state of agitation and just wanted to get out of the area. The paramedic advised that the driver did not appear to be impaired in any way, shape, or form. He was cooperative and polite when the police arrived. However, he maintained his insistence that his car be unstuck so that he could leave the location as soon as possible. A tow truck was summoned to assist in getting the vehicle dislodged. The police seemed to be disinterested in pursuing any type of action against the driver since he was neither impaired nor caused any legitimate property damage. It was at this time that the paramedic advised that the driver of the vehicle recounted what caused him to veer off the street in the first place. The driver said that he was northbound on the road and could see from quite a ways back that there was a bright white light in the southbound side of the road. He said it was far brighter than any headlights he'd ever seen, and it appeared to be slightly higher than the street, like perhaps up on the sidewalk. The driver said that he figured someone had a broken headlight or that their headlight was at a bad angle and that was what was causing it to appear so bright. As the driver got closer to the light, he noticed that it was, quote, definitely up on the southbound sidewalk. And then he figured that it must have been a car crash with the headlights, quote, all out of whack. The driver said that as he got even closer, he slowed his vehicle significantly. He became transfixed by the light and it began moving diagonally from across the street towards his vehicle. He advised that he was driving no more than 10 miles per hour as the light swept in an erratic arc upwards and then down towards the hood of his car. He said that he instantly jerked the steering wheel to the right, causing his vehicle to drive over the curb into the vacant lot and become lodged on the parking block where it still remained. Lastly, the driver stated, quote, I don't know what it was or where it went, but it was over there for the longest time. Right there, right where that thing is. At this point, the driver pointed to the adjacent street corner. Up until now, the paramedic had paid no attention to the opposite side of the 5-lane street. It was at this time that he saw it. Laying right on the street corner was a dead deer. The paramedic, along with the other members of the life squad, walked over to the animal. It was odd enough to see a deer in the city, let alone one that was dead on the sidewalk. However, the strangeness didn't end there. It would have been easy to assume that the animal had been struck by a car, except for the fact that it had been cut directly in half just below the rib cage. The head and the forelimbs were resting on the animal's left side, with the hindquarters and back legs similarly positioned just a few feet away. The paramedic described the bisection of the animal as, quote, surgical, with no drop of blood on the sidewalk. He went on to say, quote, it was almost like it was posed there. The front half was perfect, no damage, and the back half was perfect too. No damage either. It was just cut in half, and then separated by like 3 feet. No blood, no mangled insides, nothing. Just a perfect deer cut perfectly in half. When asked what happened to the animal, the paramedic stated that the police had the city shop respond and remove the carcass. He said that the shop workers didn't think anything of it. So we're left to ponder. What exactly trapped a canine in a cooler and left it in the middle of the road? What bisected a deer and deposited it on the sidewalk? In the end, I suppose that odd lights and the witching hour are the only correlating factors between both of these tales. Lights that were reported to be there 1 minute and gone the next. So, the next time someone says, go towards the light, you might just want to think again. And that concludes our transmission for this evening. Let us close with this reminder. In truth, we are the light. We are the form given to light. Vast Unknown Radio is written, curated, and produced by me. My research assistant is Gypsy. And on the soundboard, well, that's DJ Chainsaw Massacre. Tune in next time for more tales of the esoteric and the unusual. And maybe, just maybe, our signals will cross again. Thanks for listening. This has been Vast Unknown Radio.